All right. Salamat pagi. Good morning, magandang umaga. Welcome to the global perspective on gambling and gaming, navigating the risks in this digital age. This is the first conference organized by major organizations in the gambling and gaming industry, namely International Society of Substance Abuse Professionals Indonesia, Seagulls Flock Organization, Smart Recovery, and International Gambling Course for Certification Board. My name is Gerald Lagula from the Seagulls Flock Organization, and I will be your moderator for today's conference. I know everyone is so excited to attend and to listen to our speakers at this point. We have carefully curated and chosen the best and the brightest in the industry. At the moment, we will be having six specific sessions, and I won't be lengthening your excitement anymore. At this point, I would like to call Ms. Teresita Castillo to deliver her opening remarks. Cheat is a licensed psychologist, an international certified addiction professional level 2 ICAP 2, international certified recovery support specialist ICRSS, international certified gambling conference 1. She was also a former chairperson and president of ISOP Philippine chapter. She is Seagulls Flock organization's current president and chairperson of the board. She is also a consultant for Quezon City, the biggest city in the Philippines, where she is helping set up the city government's responsible gambling and gaming office. Chit was also a global master trainer for the recovery curriculum of the Colombo Plan Drug Advisory Program and a global drug demand reduction trainer of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Chit, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff, for your kind introduction. And good morning, good evening, and good day to everyone. Okay, just a little trivia. 3 months ago, I had dinner with Ahmad Sam over a plateful of their new favorite restaurant here in Manila, Manam's Caramelized Patis Wings, within the germ of an idea of Seagull's Flock collaboration for a gambling and gaming program was conceived. Thus, Seagull's Flock, in partnership with ISAP Indonesia, with the International Gambling Counselor Certification Board, or IGCCB, and Smart Recovery, is honored to co-host this virtual learning session aptly titled Global Perspectives on Gambling and Gaming, Navigating the Risk in this Digital Age. Gambling is everywhere and does not seem to go away anytime soon. Many people enjoy gambling without having a problem. However, people lose control of their gambling, at which point it does become a problem. Develop gambling addictions also develop problems with drugs and alcohol. Most, if not all of us here today have been in the field for substance use disorder, and we are fully aware that neither addiction is easy to manage without professional help. In one of the WHO discussion paper, serious problem gambling was referred to as pathological gambling when first included in DSM-3 in 1980. It was placed in the impulse control disorders category. Pathological gambling was renamed gambling disorder in the DSM-5 and moved to the new category of addictions and related disorders. Gambling disorder is the only non-substance addiction in this new category. Its inclusion was based on extensive research demonstrating commonalities between serious problem gambling and substance use disorders. Legalized gambling is increasing globally and has emerged as a popular choice for both brick and mortar gambling, online, and other virtual platforms. The emergence of technology in the past 2 decades, such as both the internet and electronic or online games, has become increasingly popular with people of all ages, particularly children and adolescents. Estimates from UNICEF, a study from 2017, have shown that 1 in 3 under 18-year-olds across the globe use the internet, and 75% of adolescents play electronic games daily in developed countries like the US, Europe, and Australia. The rise of online gambling in Indonesia has emerged as a significant public health concern, driven by various psychological, social, and regulatory factors. Despite stringent laws prohibiting gambling, the accessibility and appeal of online platforms have led to increase participation, particularly among young adults. Social influences, particularly social media and peer interactions, normalize gambling behaviors, making them more appealing to adolescents. Mental health issues such as anxiety and depression are closely linked to online gambling addiction, as individuals may use gambling as a coping mechanism. This morning, we will have the opportunity to hear from leading gambling experts to expand our perspectives and discover solutions to reduce gambling related harms. Our main objective is not only to raise awareness and understanding of problem gambling and gaming, but to pursue actionable strategies and best practices that can drive sustainable positive change. Our goal is to build a new community of practitioners and advocates who follow and apply the science, a community that will make a strong, visible impact on addressing this new social pandemic. Seagull's Flock is proud to be pioneering pathways towards this goal, but we are fully aware that we could not move boldly ahead without the support from partners like, of course, ISOP Indonesia, IGCCB, and Smart Recovery. The extent of knowledge and services on problem gambling is relatively nil, and today, together, we will start the conversation and create a space to place gambling as one of the priority public health agenda and initiate evidence-based programs and prevention strategies, early intervention, treatment, and recovery provisions for members of our community who may be at risk for problem or disordered gambling. To every attendee of this webinar, may our discussions be fruitful, our collaboration strategic, and our shared commitment to responsible gambling and gaming be unwavering. We are very happy with this unexpected turnout of participants for this webinar, and our hearts are full, and we thank you all for joining us today. So, ladies and gentlemen, together, let's start the conversation and break the stigma. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chit. So again, we would like to welcome everyone. At the moment, we have already 142 attendees from all over the world. So again, welcome to Global Perspective on Gambling and Gaming, Navigating the Risks in Digital Age. So thank you, Chit, for setting the tone for today's conference. I'd like to go back to the key message of Chit. She mentioned that the overall objective of this conference is to pursue actionable strategies to drive positive change. Okay, so the session, our conference will be having 6 speakers. So the 6 speakers will be divided into 2 groups. So the first group will be will cover 3 specific topics. Number 1 is the key points from the Lancet Public Health Commission on Gambling to be discussed by Dr. Angela Rentol. It will be followed by a discussion on the approaches and techniques for preventing gaming disorder among youth to be discussed by Dr. Stephanie Diaz Morel. And number 3 is the topic on the basics about gambling, problem gambling, similarities with SUD, and the need for trained workforce to be discussed by Jody Bechtel. Allow me to introduce our first speakers. Dr. Angela Rentol conducts research on the commercial determinants of suicide with a focus on gambling-related suicide prevention. Evidence generated through her work is used to inform debates requiring healthy equity and commercial determinants of health. Angela is currently investigating pathways to prevent gambling-related suicide through a postdoctoral fellow funded by the Suicide Prevention Australia. Angela is also an associate professor at Federation University, an honorary principal research fellow at the Melbourne School of Population and Global Health, an adjunct at the Department of Forensic Medicine at Monash University, and a 2018 Churchill Fellow. Angela is also a member of the World Health Organization's Group on Gambling and a commissioner on the Lancet Public Health Commission on Gambling and associate editor of the journal Critical Gambling Studies. Angela holds a Doctor of Public Health from Monash University, a Master of Social Science from RMIT, and Bachelor of Arts from the University of Melbourne. So, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming our first speaker, Dr. Angela Rentol. Angela, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome and for the opportunity to present our work with you today and your wide audience. Can everyone see my slides okay at the moment?
Not yet, Angela?
Not yet. Okay. Coming through
Okay,
now,
there
hopefully.
you go. Yeah, but we can, I think this is set in presenter view. Probably can,
Uh,
okay, yeah.
okay, how's that? Is that
We can, yeah, now it's good. Okay, we're good,
thank you so
Angela.
much. Great. So I'm presenting to you today from the unceded lands of the Gunai Kurnai people in regional Victoria in Australia. So Salamat Pagi, and it's great to be with you. Recently, just I think a week and a half ago, we launched our new Lancet Public Health Commission on Gambling at the Lisbon Addiction Conference. And I'm just going to, because we've only got 15 minutes, I've put a link to the full report. I'll put that in the chat at the end. But I'll just give you a brief overview of some of the key issues that we cover in that report and some of the key recommendations. Okay, so the Commission brought together a group of over 20 global experts, not only in gambling, but we had an interdisciplinary team. So we had people who were regulatory experts, people who were sociologists, and also active psychiatrists. And of course, I want to acknowledge the wonderful Dr. Christiana Siste, who's here today with us, who was one of the commissioners on this report as well. Uh, and just before I begin, I'll note that none of the commissioners had any financial links to the gambling industry or any structural cooperation or collaboration with the gambling industry. And I think that's one of the key important issues in this field is disentangling some of the industry interests from the science. So the overall objective of the Lancet Public Health Commission on Gambling was to recommend actions that ensure gambling is regulated in the public interest and to protect populations from from harm. And so really that required us to outline why we think we need to systematically reframe some of the ways in which gambling has been presented. Traditionally, that's been as a leisure activity and allowed the gambling industry to use practices that promote gambling as a recreational pursuit. But in reality, as many of us know, gambling is associated with serious and severe harms, and that it can erode, but not just financial resources, but also people's health quite substantially. And I'll come to some of the findings in our commission report briefly soon. So we had three key areas of focus in this report. So we wanted to describe what a public health approach to gambling actually meant. And to do that, we took a commercial determinants lens to the public health approach. And I'll describe what that is in a moment. So we looked at the way that gambling products have changed and the dark patterns of advertising and promotion and the choice architecture that is embedded in many of these online and digital platforms now that enable gambling operators to target people and to encourage them to spend more money and time on their products. We look at the political and economic drivers of the expansion of gambling. There was the commission had a subgroup that went and did a global gambling policy review and looked at some of the economic models of the industry and how it operates. There was also a systematic review of gambling harms done globally, and typically gambling harm has been measured in many countries using population surveys that look at problem gambling severity index across the population and find around, in many countries or in Australia, they often find around 1% of the population is at severe risk of high risk of gambling harm, so 8+ on the problem gambling severity index. But a group actually did a systematic review globally of the available surveys, and I'll come to some of their findings and some of the recommendations relating to the surveillance of epidemiology of gambling shortly. But these were the three kind of key areas of focus for the Commission. So I've got a table that we included in the report that really looks at how a public health approach differs from an approach that takes a responsible gambling approach. So our previous work has found that the responsible gambling approach to regulating gambling policy and responding to harm has actually been an industry initiative, and it suits the industry's agenda because it focuses on the individual and how the individual responds to their products, and focuses on a smaller proportion of people that are classified as experiencing severe harm. But we know that harm occurs at subclinical levels as well. And taking a population approach means that you can't predict who in the population is going to develop a problem with gambling. The public health framework emphasizes universal measures that don't just focus on individual responsibility, and it takes a more of an upstream approach as well. So it looks at some of the systems and structures that have created conditions where people are vulnerable to developing addictions and vulnerable to harm. So I'll let you, those that are interested, to look at the full report for more information about that. So the commercial determinants of gambling harm really looks at the problem through the lens of commercial actors, and it looks at the strategies and used by the private sector to promote products and choices that are detrimental to health. So what we did was map some of those industry strategies and look at the commercial gambling ecosystem. So not just the gambling operators and providers, but the ways in which other actors within this system have also become dependent on gambling revenues, and examined how they exercise their power. So the commercial gambling ecosystem wouldn't exist without those that work in financial and communication sectors. So we have technologies now that obviously allow the deployment of gambling products and promotions immediately to people that are, allow us to have a casino in our pockets now 24/7. There are other actors within this system, not just the game designers and the programmers, but also in Australia in particular, the broadcasters who have commercial agreements with sporting bodies to promote sports wagering on their matches, for instance. And we're seeing that play out in Australia, the power and the influence of the wider ecosystem in lobbying the government to resist reforms that would actually reduce harm at a population level. So in Australia, we've got a parliamentary inquiry report that recommended ending gambling advertising. And the government at the moment is wavering on adopting those recommendations because it says that the broadcasters rely on the revenue from gambling companies, and we need to support the broadcasters. And this is a really good example in Australia of how the wider ecosystem can influence the gambling policy and regulatory environment. So we also have a system now that these commercial products are becoming more intense, and more continuous engagement is encouraged with these products. And Natasha Schull, an American cultural anthropologist, wrote a fantastic book almost over 10 years ago now, called Addiction by Design. And in that, she described the way in which land-based machine gambling in Las Vegas operated, and how industry insiders were quoted in that book as describing their imperative to try and encourage users to play to extinction, which meant that their aim was to ensure that when they had a person who was using a machine, they wanted to make sure that they could use all of their available funds and extend their time on device. And now that we have this rapid growth in digital gambling products, this means that is dispersed across the world and across the population now, and intensively promoted as well. And the gambling industry, of course, invests heavily in marketing and advertising, and they use increasingly sophisticated techniques to encourage consumers to take up or continue to use their product, including through social media platforms and recruiting or engaging celebrities and influencers to promote their products as well. And so this digital environment is now very data rich and allows for what we call what has been described as like tuned marketing and advertising to really hyper target particular users that they know will continue to help to generate profits. And of course, there are partnerships now with commercial partnerships with not just with gambling companies through sporting organisations, the charity sector, and we've seen the gamification of sport in many countries now. And that's harmful not just because it is another forum where people are potentially triggered to or recruited into gambling, but it also normalizes gambling, particularly for young people who are interested in sport, and it creates a new kind of environment for young people to think that gambling is a normal pastime when they see their favourite sporting heroes promoting sport through their jerseys or at the stadium. We have products now that span the boundary of what we would traditionally have considered to be gambling products. So social casino games and fantasy sports and esports now embed gambling-like elements into their products. And it really blurs the distinction between gambling and gaming itself. And of course, that again makes young people particularly vulnerable to developing gambling problems. This is just one of the maps that was produced through the group of commissioners and authors who went and did a systematic review of gambling harm globally. And what I wanted to show here today was just how much data is missing from many parts of the globe. And our report also goes into some of the problems with existing epidemiological data around tracking both participation in gambling, but also harm from gambling. So the group of commissioners that looked at legislation relating to gambling found that over 80% of country or jurisdictions in the world now offer gambling legally. And the Commission has made an estimate of the number of people who are experiencing problematic or disordered gambling. So that's 54.7 million men and 25.3 million women. But we know that these are likely to be underestimates because we just don't have data from so many countries where we know companies are targeting populations. One of our commissioners has worked in Malawi, and this is a photo that he provided just to show that the gambling companies are, of course, as regulation in some high-income countries increases, they've gone to lower middle-income countries where regulation is new or limited or doesn't even exist. And he has described this as a neo-colonial system, really, where we're seeing very vulnerable people who don't have the funds to gamble really being captured by commercial operators, and that money is heading back offshore to the gambling operators who are international corporations. So I just wanted to make a note about some of the challenges of the epidemiology of understanding surveillance systems globally. We really need to ensure that we can try and get data from many of the countries that we don't have any information about participation in gambling. We need to support low and middle income countries to try and collate this information, because we know that their populations are being increasingly targeted. But we also need to move beyond just capturing population prevalence and participation in gambling. We need to match that with indicated data. So not just They're rolling out population prevalence surveys, which is what we've done in Australia for many decades. But to match this with data about the number of gambling-related suicides, calls to helplines, emergency department attendances, debt registers, to really get a better picture of the nature and the scale of harm. We came up with 7 recommendations for government, civil society, and intergovernmental organisations. And it's really, the first is to prioritise, governments need to prioritise protecting the public health and wellbeing of populations above economic operators. We're really encouraging strong and effective regulation to reduce population exposure to gambling products, and that includes restricting or prohibiting advertising and marketing, and making available affordable and universal treatment to people who've been harmed, and also to work on denormalising gambling. We think that we need well-resourced and empowered regulators who enforce minimum standards such as age verification, provide national registers for self-exclusion that are effective, that enable people to set up accounts so that they can set limits on the amount of money that they're able to lose, and that they hit binding limits when that happens. We need to ensure that policy, regulation, and research is protected from the interests of commercial influence. So that means moving away from industry funding of science, industry influence in policy and regulatory settings rapidly, in our view. That needs to happen. And in order for that to happen, we need to see governments funding, replacing that funding, to make sure that the science is conducted in the public interest. We would like to see international groups such as the WHO focus on gambling, and really that's critical in terms of the international nature of this product. Now, of course, it spans, it crosses borders, and there are companies that are licensed in one area who are promoting their products in another country where they are not licensed, and which is actually illegal. And if we had international cooperation to regulate this better, we could actually see penalties apply to some of those companies where they're promoting gambling products in places where they're not licensed, or where it's effectively illegal. And we really want to support and promote and amplify the voices of those who've got lived experience of gambling harm, and to see the development of international alliances of civil society organisations to support that as well, in order for, because there's so much we can learn from people who have that lived experience of gambling harm, and we need to hear those voices in the policy, research and regulatory settings that are much louder forum. So thank you so much. I'll end there, and I'm happy to take questions that people may have.
Yeah. Thank you, Angela. I think our participants are still trying to digest and understand the material. Very insightful
Yes, I'm sorry if
discussion.
I went too quickly. Yes,
Yeah,
no
yeah.
problem.
Yes, yes. From my end, there are 2 striking things that I'd like to emphasize. Number 1, gambling has to be viewed from a public health approach using commercial determinant lens. And number 2, you were able to emphasize the importance of the government, no, especially in protecting public health and well-being above economic motivations, specifically, and that would specifically include regulation. So thank you, Angela,
Thank you
for
so
your
much.
wonderful presentation. So we will now be moving on to our next topic. So the next speaker is Dr. Stephanie Diaz Morel. She is an associate professor and the program director of the Masters of Social Work graduate program at the Pennsylvania Western University. Uh, as a licensed clinical social as a licensed clinical social and PhD level researcher, Dr. Diaz Morel has dedicated her work to helping improve the lives of the youth, families, adults, and communities. She's the author of a plethora of presentations, scientific research studies, and book chapters on the topics of gaming disorder and associated behavioral addictions. In 2013, Dr. Diaz Morel founded Reboot and Recover, a nonprofit organization dedicated to finding solutions for a balanced living in a technology-driven world. She has established education, prevention curriculums, treatment, and research on gaming disorder and other problematic technology-based behaviors for children, youth, adults, and families that have been utilized by organizations worldwide. Her work has been presented nationally and internationally to aid prevention workers, social workers, counselors, and medical professionals working with youths, families, and adults experiencing psychosocial concerns or harms due to their gaming or technology use behavior. Ladies and gentlemen, to talk about the approaches and techniques for preventing gaming disorder among youth, join me in welcoming Dr. Stephanie Diaz Morel. Dr. Stephanie, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone. I'm glad to be here today and to share with you some of my work and insights about approaches and techniques for preventing gaming disorder among youth. All right, so before we begin, I always like to take just a brief moment to have a mindful moment and to acknowledge you all for your efforts in being here today and in seeking to learn and in striving for more. Intentionality behind the work that we do and taking a moment to be mindful and present can always help us when we are working with others and to clear our own state of minds, as many of you have a lot that you do with the work and also experience a lot of changes and challenges in your everyday lives. So if it's helpful to you at this time, I invite you to take a deep breath in and exhale. We'll do that one more time. Take another deep breath in and exhale. And ground yourself to this moment and to being present. All right. So a little bit of information about me here on the slide. As you can see, I've been working in this space for quite some time, and I'm glad that Dr. Angela prefaced today's presentations by discussing the conversions with gambling and gaming. So my focus will really be on gaming and talking a bit more about some precise areas where you can take this information and begin to either unpack some of the areas of convergence with gaming, meaning video gaming, or use it directly to apply it to the work that you're doing in the communities or want to start doing as well. Okay, so this image was taken at the League of Legends Championship Esports Tournament, and needless to say, it was very well attended. So I'd like to share this because of the international, universally international growing popularity of video games. And not only was this arena full, but it was also live streamed, and the live streams reached over 5.1 million views. So clearly, video gaming is very popular, and esports, which is competitive video gaming for those who might not be familiar, is an ever-growing sport as well, and has been for quite some time now. When I use the terminology video gaming, online gaming, gaming, or computer gaming, these are all interchangeable terms, and often they're used to describe playing video games, but each term can encompass a varying form, genre, and style of video games. Nowadays, video games are rarely a solo experience that is played on a console alone. Most gaming is played with multiple players or with some kind of connectivity to the internet, which allows for a lot of features to be included in games that historically were not, making them more immersive, but also implementing techniques and approaches by video game companies and others that keep us more engaged. All right, so what does this behavior look like? I'd like to pose this chart here, right? When we think about gaming or gambling, right? As you notice here, there is an arrow pointing both ways, and that's because in the spectrum of behaviors, an individual might be considered as someone who is leisurely just spending their leisure time engaging in video games. But there is a potential
for that amount of time to become risky. And when we say that there is some risk, this is when we're starting to see negative psychosocial impacts and consequences as a result of the extended amount of period of time, effort, or money that they are spending within the habits of playing video games, or the behavior of playing video games, I should say. This can also lead to harmful or disordered behavior. So there is a categorization of gaming disorder, which we will go over as well. But as we continue through the slides in the presentation, please keep this in mind that there is a spectrum of behavior. And as the arrow is pointing both ways, there is the potential for it to be either in the leisure area, risky, harmful, or disordered, depending on the types of symptoms and criteria that we see with the youth that we're working with. All right, so gaming disorder was first defined by the American Psychiatric Association in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders 5. The current rendition is the DSM-5 TR that was published in 2022, and the same diagnostic criteria remains. And more recently, the World Health Organization did include gaming disorder in the International Classification of Diseases 11 as a formal disorder. The inclusion in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders for gaming disorder is within Section 3 of the Diagnostic Considerations warranting further study. And myself and a group of other international experts are part of the DSM-5 Gaming Disorder Task Force, where we are working diligently with the American Psychiatric Association to move the gaming disorder current criteria from diagnostic consideration into a full diagnosis. So if you were to open the DSM-5, this is what you would see when you go to the section that talks about gaming disorder, right? There are 9 main criteria, and in order for someone to be diagnosed with gaming disorder, they must meet 5 of the 9 criteria, and the criteria must be causing a clinically significant impairment within their psychosocial functioning, right? So they're social, they're occupational, or other areas of psychosocial functioning. So what can this look like? Well, when we're working with youth in particular, one of the areas that might come to mind is how their gaming impacts their scholastic activities. Are they engaging in gaming to a point of where it is affecting their scholastics, their academic achievements? Is it also affecting them emotionally or biologically to where their sleep patterns are also being impacted by this, right? Perhaps they're sleeping less. And so that can also impact someone's emotional state, right? If you sleep less, especially for adolescents and youth, as sleep is very important to healthy growth and development. So those are a couple of areas where you might notice some of that clinically significant impairment when working with youth. Now, it is important to also highlight that gaming as a behavior can serve a purpose. And so when youth are engaging in video game playing, it can be a fun activity where they derive a sense of interactive socialization when they're online. It also can help them build cooperation skills if they're playing in these multiplayer worlds where cooperation with others are needed in order to level up, in order to move past a certain challenge within the game. And these are skills that when I work with youth, individually in a clinical setting, but also in the prevention setting, we talk about the translatability of those skills. So how can we take this information from inside of the video game world and now apply this to when you're working on something collaboratively with your community or with your family or with your church or in school, right? How do we use those same cooperative skills that you learned in a game and apply it to a physical world setting so that we can achieve the same kind of sense of accomplishment or achievement, but now in a different setting? Games can also offer a quantifiable measure of improvement. When playing a video game, you might see how many points are needed to achieve a next level, right? You can see how many XP points. There is a bar where you can see it loading. And that, of course, is different than our physical world, where measurements of improvement might be a bit more abstract and aren't as directly and immediate as you might get in a video game. And gaming can also provide a sense of autonomy for many youth or a sense of community. They might form friendships with those that they play the games with online, or with those that they might chat about online in other servers like in Discord or Twitch, where they can discuss gameplay as well. So there is a lot of purpose that can be derived from gaming. I think it's important to acknowledge that so that we can understand more of what the youth are looking for in their games and use again some of the skills that they are gaining within game and translate them into the physical world. So some areas to be aware of, right? This is based off of research that looks at associations between levels of gaming disorder and some of those biopsychosocial factors that we looked at. Of course, we have the symptoms that is included in the DSM, but these are things also to look for. So most commonly, what we see associated with gaming disorder are signs and symptoms of depression, signs and symptoms of anxiety. There is also an association with gaming disorder and suicidal ideation, as social isolation, and interpersonal and relationship conflicts. So although there can be with some games a social aspect, many of the times this aspect is only online. And so the physical social isolation can also have a toll on us as humans, especially for youth, where it's important to begin to form bonds and have physical social interaction with peers and family and friends. Social anxiety, as well as boredom with relationships outside of gaming and impulsively spending on games, have also been associated with gaming disorder or higher levels of gaming disorder. For co-occurring with gaming, so these are, of course, diagnoses that we see often that co-occur with gaming disorder. So amongst the most common of those are ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, depression. So this is the whole range of depression, right? Major depression, situational depression, for example. And anxiety, also the entire range of anxiety, right? So generalized anxiety, situational anxiety, for example, or a diagnosis of ASD, autism spectrum disorder. So if you work with any youth that have known symptoms of any of these diagnoses, or you know they might have some of these disorders, talking to them about gaming can be a good approach, knowing that these often co-occur. So we can begin to kind of do some of that prevention work before we get to levels of disordered gaming, right? Perhaps you work with youth that have symptoms of ADHD and anxiety or ASD, and they are also engaging in video gaming, but they might not be at that risky or harmful area yet. Maybe they're more still in the leisure area of gameplay. So in order to help prevent them from moving up that spectrum of behaviors to risky, harmful, or disordered, beginning to have these conversations and create this awareness is a good approach for some primary prevention. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I have a few more slides, but this is from a study of youth. It was 3,034 youth in Singapore, and they looked at social factors and co-occurring mental health disorders with gaming disorder. And as you can see here, some of the more common things that impacted pathological gaming, which is how they define gaming disorder, were impulse control, anxiety, self-control, and family environment. And some of those were mediating variables as well. But just again, things to keep in consideration, right? That impulse control, family environment, anxiety, and self-control can all impact the level of gaming disorder amongst youth. All right, so we've reached the section on intersection of gaming and gambling. And again, Dr. Angela touched on this as well. Just wanted to give a few more concrete examples here. So when it comes to gaming and gambling, or how gambling can show up in video games, there's a couple of different ways. Firstly, the monetization of mechanics, and there's also skills versus luck. Now, while gaming is principally defined by its interactivity, meaning it's a predominantly skills-based play, and there's contextual indicators of progression, like those level up bars or how much XP you need to get somewhere. Gambling is defined by betting and wagering mechanics, which are predominantly chance-based for the determined outcome, and the monetization features that involve risk and payout to the individual for gambling. But with monetization in video game developers do use user experience research to develop gameplay elements that are designed to keep the users playing. And through psychological approaches like behavior analysis, rewards-based mechanics, this is one way that they achieve this. And that's similar to like gambling. Video games often do include repetitive actions with intermittent reinforcement that's both positive and negative reinforcement by allowing the users to engage in decision-making processes that can give them a high reward, right? So here's an example of what that might look like as well with betting and wagering directly, purchasing of virtual currency with physical world currency, but also skewing what the economy of each of these currencies is worth. You see the last pack here says that it's 450,000 VC virtual coins. So it says that you pay for 250,000 and you get 200,000 free, right? So of course, creating that sensation of, oh, look, I'm getting something for something else, but really the amount is arbitrary because they're setting the prices, right? There's no economy when it comes to these kinds of things. And when we think of the role of skill versus luck, well, this involves how outcomes are determined in the game by either entirely by skill through competition or entirely by chance, usually with algorithms, a random number generator, a draw, or a lottery. And many video games include a combination of randomly generated predetermined outcomes and skill-based outcomes. So there was a recent survey of video game developers that asked about microtransactions in a video game, and 90% of those video game developers said that microtransactions are not needed in many game titles. They said that most AAA games can be financially successful just by being buy to play, and 65% of the game developers surveyed backed that physical and digital models of premium titles are now using more microtransactions as a form to increase their monetization rather than as something that is necessary for the game or to help the players. All right, so how gambling shows up in video games. Of course, we have the chance-based microtransactions. We also have loot boxes. There are simulated casinos and social casinos. And betting and wagering is not just with virtual currency, as I showed, but it can also be on items. So, for example, skins, which are a cosmetic item that an individual can wear to change their appearance of their avatar. A rare item, so perhaps it's an item you get from a loot box that you can sell that might have a purpose in the game or may not. And then there's NFTs as well that are essentially a form of virtual art. So just a couple of things to be aware of. For those who might not be familiar, loot boxes are an in-game purchase consisting of a virtual container that awards players with items and modifications based on chances or probabilities. There's a number of legislation that has occurred here in the US against some video game companies because of loot box practices, and loot boxes are banned in many countries because of their gambling-like mechanics. And of course, betting and wagering, right? So this can be either, as I mentioned, directly with cosmetic items. It can be in-person or virtual betting and wagering on esports and gambling that occurs online. This is PvP gambling, so player versus player or team versus team or fantasy esports. And then there's also social casinos where perhaps you might not be of age to go into a casino, right? If you're going to a country where they allow you to go into a casino, but you can go into a virtual casino. And so, there is still the opportunity for you to be exposed to that, even if they aren't able to do so within their own home. So lastly, technology is really designed to be addictive, right? We have nowadays technology uses persuasive technology design. Many companies consider factors like motivation, ability, and triggers when they are designing these apps and games. The goal is to really persuade you to stay on. And since there's no regulation regarding these, no international regulation regarding how these types of modalities are used, a lot of these designs are targeted towards youth because they have an increasing amount of time. And so that taking them from that leisure to risky or harmful area of gameplay is something that they have more accessibility to than perhaps parents or adults that might also have other responsibilities. All right, so essentially what to look out for, skills versus luck, games with skills that focus on using skill to advance versus games with luck. So those games that have more skill than luck, we could consider them more video gaming. And those games that have more gambling are those with more luck or chance than skills. There's really kind of a gray area between, and there's no one succinct measure like, okay, 60-40, 70-30 because all the games are different and how they're regulated. It really comes down to examining the game and determining on your own if it is more skills based or more luck or chance based. So what can we do? I want to give you a couple of things that you can take away for the work that you're doing. So with prevention and support, you can have meaningful conversations, identify the importance that gaming might fill within youth's lives, manage these power dynamics, right? So perhaps with a teacher and a student or a parent and a child, what that looks like when we're having these conversations, reduce pathologizing, limit setting unique to each home or classroom if you're working with teachers. And I do have media plans as well available on Reboot and Recover's website that you can use. It's a plan where you enter in and help to set some of those limits within a household for the screen time that is being used, including gaming. How do we engage? Well, there are ways to engage others by setting boundaries and discussions that are geared towards reducing screen time and increasing effective in-person communication. Modeling how to use tech behavior is one where I talk to parents a lot about. It's very important, right? If we are setting rules and limits and regulations, to also model that behavior because our children will watch and they will follow what we do, right? Give it a name, talk about the potential impact that overusing gaming and digital online media can have on us, and also open a dialogue, right? Ask what they like about it. What do you enjoy about playing video games? Some more tips for caregivers or parents, what they can do, limit screen time that's unique to each family. Know that not all content online is equal, right? So we talked about some games might have more skills, some might have more chance. So how we determine which is gaming or gambling, knowing what the content is can help with that. Having the conversations early and often, right? Revisiting this, using tools as well for effective communication, like the media plan that I shared and instilling values and sharing your thoughts. Very important. Really, what it comes down to is shifting perspective. So, thinking of screen use like a diet. The content viewed is nourishment for our minds. Some content is fruit and vegetables, and some content is cake and fried foods. So, to find your balanced content meal when you're online can help you to have a better balanced diet and also help make sure that we are staying healthy. All right, here's just another example of some ways to start the conversation. What are you playing? What's the goal of the game? And how did you get to that goal, right? To open and have those conversations with youth. I'm going to skip this. All right, so here's one more resource for you. I developed an evidence-informed prevention curriculum for the discussion of the convergence between gaming and gambling that's being used with youth in the US in 9 different states. So if you are interested in that information, there's more available online. Here's just some quick insight about it and what the curriculum looks like. And there's a QR code if you want to scan that. It'll bring up the website as well with more information about the prevention program. I'm happy to meet and discuss with that as well. As you know, the IGCCB, we have gaming disorder certifications for any clinicians that are attending. If you're interested in learning more about gaming in particular and working with youth and want to receive some rigorous training materials, you can scan this QR code. All right, and that's everything. I know I went over time. I apologize. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope that was helpful for the work that you're doing, and I'm glad to see you all today.
Thank you, Dr. Stephanie. It was a very insightful discussion. Um, from my end, if I will be summarizing the 20-minute talk of Dr. Stephanie, I think number one would be the first lesson learned from me would be despite the negative social construct, I think gaming can still serve a purpose. Especially, I mean, gaming can be used to develop socialization, to improve autonomy, and of course, to develop or to develop a sense of community. And there is another major lesson that I learned from the discussion of Dr. Stephanie is that there is a very thin line that separates gaming and gambling. And this intersection can be viewed from three basic factors or three things. Number one is monetization, number two is betting, and number three skills versus luck. And considering the negative construct for gaming and the thin line separating gaming and gambling, we workers no in these industries must be prepared no, to develop meaningful conversation and to manage relationship, because these two are very important activities to ensure that we would be able to manage this particular social construct and problem. Thank you very much for enlightening us about these topics, Dr. Stephanie. So again, I am seeing a lot of questions in the chat box, so keep those questions coming. So I will now be moving on to our third speaker. Dr. Jody Bechtold will be talking about the basics about gambling, problem gambling, similarities with SUD, and the need for trained workforce. Dr. Jody Bechtold is a highly regarded gambling addiction expert working extensively across the globe with individuals, organizations, and associations. She is the CEO of the Better Institute, a group practice located in Pittsburgh. She is the co-author of the Gambling Disorder Treatment Handbook, a guide for mental health professionals, and 2 chapters in the Social Workers Desk Reference version 4 on gambling and gaming disorders, published in 2022. Dr. Bechtold, Jody serves as an advisor to several startup and nonprofit organizations, including Gampin, Birches Health, and Seagulls Black Organization in the Philippines. She also serves as the president of the International Gambling Counselor Certification Board, or IGCCB. Jody holds a master's degree in social work from the University of Pittsburgh's School of Social Work and has several certifications with the International Gambling Counselor Certification Board. So, join me in welcoming Jody Bechtold. Jody, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are and what time it is. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I also feel that it is a perfect segue from what Dr. Angela and Dr. Stephanie were talking about. So we are going to go ahead and jump right in. Again, thank you for that wonderful intro. And so, one of the things we really need to talk about is what is gambling? And this is a term that we're finding across the globe that the younger generation doesn't know what this means. Sometimes we even have to say, what kind of activities do you engage in? And what type of sports wagering or other betting do you do? Because the word gambling is very different. But overall, if we look at one definition, gambling is about playing games of chance for money or some other stake and to take a risk in order to gain some advantage. For those who are familiar with 12-step, Gamblers Anonymous' definition: any betting or wagering for self or for others, whether for money or not, no matter how slight or insignificant, where the outcome is uncertain or depends on chance or skill, constitutes gambling. So you can see very strict definitions of what this really means. There's so many different forms of gambling, right? We have so many online and as well as in casino or brick and mortar, roulette, poker, the slots, sports, isabong, right? Sabong, all kinds of different types of gambling. And it's so normalized in so many cultures that really being able to have the right conversation and using the right terminology is going to be really important. So take a moment and really kind of take in this picture. It really moves on a continuum from no gambling through social gambling, more at-risk gambling problem, and then gambling disorder. So we're looking on this continuum from none all the way to severe. And we're also trying to match what type of prevention or treatment would be most helpful. And so obviously there's primary prevention when there's no gambling before it reaches social or at risk. There's secondary to keep it from becoming a gambling disorder. And depending on the culture, some cultures really do endorse harm reduction, which again, the ultimate goal of harm reductions is abstinence, but maybe just not right away. And that goes throughout from social all the way to gambling disorder. But what does it look like to really understand more at-risk, problematic, and disordered gambling? As we've noted already in the webinar, this gambling disorder is considered a behavioral addiction. And there are several warning signs, and again, culturally specific, how this might translate. But overall, we're looking at more of that isolation or withdrawing from friends and family in order to gamble. Taking money that is meant for necessities, whether it's food, medicine, rent, school money, anything like that, and using it to gamble instead. Gambling on credit, so any form of loans or credit cards or anything like that would also constitute a warning sign of problem gambling. When people have missing personal or household items, oftentimes that could be that they are selling these items in order to get cash, and more frequent borrowing from friends and family, promising to pay it back, but not being able to. Some people do ultimately resort to theft. And overall, you're going to hear individuals constantly talking about their gambling, and they're definitely thinking more frequently about their gambling. So as we discussed, this gambling disorder is in the DSM-5, actually the TR now, looking at that persistent and recurring problematic behavior with that clinically significant impairment or distress, typically viewed over a 12-month period. Now, for those of you who are substance use trained, you're going to see a lot of similarities. The gambling field took a lot of the criteria from SUD in order to inform its criteria, and then you see a lot of similarities that the gaming field took from the gambling field. And so you kind of see this passed down and crossed over. But we're looking at that preoccupation, the tolerance, right? And needing to gamble with increasing amounts of money to have that same desired excitement. The tolerance is important because that impacts the dopamine and the dopaminergic system of the brain. People don't realize that there is withdrawal when it's more severe. Restlessness and irritability is very common and can last quite some time, even though there was no chemical to be ingested. We see this loss of control where they're unable to cut back, control, or stop gambling for periods of time, risking significant relationships. Oftentimes that could be family, it could be job, education, or even more career opportunities that are risked because of gambling. And bailouts are typically where we're relying on others to provide us with financial help because of our own desperate financial situation that was caused by gambling. Now, with gaming disorder, you needed 5 or more criteria, but with gambling disorder, you need 4 of the 9 criteria. And this also cannot be better explained by way of a manic episode. So we need to really understand bipolar and sometimes the bipolar cycles and how they mimic or look similar to the gambling highs and lows. But here's something that's really interesting and useful for many of you attending today. You know substance use disorders. So what are similar and yet differences regarding SUD and gambling? These really surprise a lot of people. Now, what you're going to see with these similarities, again, you saw the DSM criteria crossover. So you see that preoccupation, that loss of control. They both can be progressive on the continuum of the disorder. And some would really argue that denial is seen in both. We're really trying to point to something outside of the person to better explain the behavior. It's not really me. It was something that happened in my life. It's not my fault, anything like that. We look at the continued behavior despite those negative consequences in major life areas. The tolerance, absolutely, as we talk about. So much is happening in the brain with the dopamine that create tolerance and needing more and more in order to have that same desired excitement. And we have urges and cravings that absolutely exist with problem gamblers as well as those with SUD disorders, right? And so, again, people don't believe some of this sometimes because with gambling, you don't ingest anything first in order to then create these types of dependencies. With these similar psychological drives, with escape or excitement or needing to self-medicate or avoid by using gambling or drugs or alcohol. Now, what are the differences? And this is really why gambling disorder is different from substance use disorder. Gambling is not self-limited. So how does somebody stop gambling when they don't ingest anything first? We're more comfortable with viewing individuals that pass out after having too much alcohol or pass out from too many drugs, something like that. How does somebody stop gambling? So it's not self-limiting because you're not ingesting anything. We also see the behavior is not explainable due to intoxication, right? And so how do we help somebody explain this behavior when they haven't ingested anything first? This leads to more intense shame and guilt, almost as if there is something morally wrong with the individual, as if it was a choice. And so then that leads to more shame and guilt, which then also furthers greater denial and stronger defenses. Individuals here will really hold on to the fact that if they just win one more time, they can solve everything. And that creates greater denial. I really don't have a problem with gambling. I have a money problem right now. And there's these fantasies of success, right? Really believing that the more I do something, the more I can win big and solve everything. And we don't see that with SUD. With SUD, we know that every time we do something, we're going to have a certain outcome, even though we're compelled to do it anyways. But with gambling, it really does trick the mind into believing that they can solve everything if they just win. And that unpredictable outcome, every time we place a bet, whether we press a button, put money down, wager something, we just don't know what's going to happen. And so the anticipation of finding out is what creates the need to do it over and over again. There are no biological tests. We can't do blood tests. We can't do urine screens to understand if someone is still gambling the way we can see if someone is still using substances. And the financial situation caused by gambling disorders is often so critical, and it must be addressed as a part of treatment. It's not optional to talk about people's finances and work with them about their finances. So that's a very different one. Family members become much more angry because they oftentimes had participated in gambling when it was still fun. And now it's not fun anymore for this individual, and the family's very angry. They believe that the person can just stop, that the person is choosing to do this as if it's a choice, and it also becomes a moral issue with the family. The reason for doing this webinar, there is so much public awareness around other disorders, but really nothing is really being discussed about problem gambling and disordered gambling. So that public awareness is really low. And believe it or not, depending on the culture, gambling is more widely accepted and widespread than it is for alcohol. We look at this with youth. Oftentimes we would never let youth have alcohol, but we don't think twice about having them place a bet, right? So what are the resources? Like, what can we do? And I really think this is our call to action, and why we're here today is to really look at how do we get more people trained and certified to really address this issue. And so with the IGCCB, it's really important that we are highlighting those capacity initiatives. You know, how do we expand training and opportunities and integrate discussion about graduate school programs, in treatment programs, in mental health areas. What do we need to do to recruit and retain people? And perfect their ways to get people to want to learn all of this in addition to what they're already doing. And how do we really foster that collaboration across disciplines and across professionals, whether it's medical and addiction specialists, and how do we really work to collaborate? This is really important. And overall, that public awareness, how do we generate the right messages that reach individuals that can really start to have this conversation? And so, as Dr. Stephanie has already outlined, I oversee, as the board president, a lot of the different certifications that are offered. And so certifications are a little different than just being trained, right? Being trained, you learn about the disorder, you learn the assessment, any type of standardizations of tools, anything like that. And you know, just like if you learn attend a workshop and learn more about CBT for a particular disorder, or maybe how CBT works with gambling, that's a training. But a certification really is much more than just a training. And so here's an example. We're looking at someone's education, what their degree or equivalency is, what type of training they have specific to gambling. And then after they have that training, how do they apply that to gain the experience? What are kinds of evaluations from other colleagues and supervisors? And then we have what we consider a board-approved clinical consultant that oversees that individual obtaining this certification. And a board-approved clinical consultant is the highest level of certification for gambling disorder treatment, and there's an equivalent for gaming disorder. And we're really looking to oversee that gambling-specific knowledge, treatment experience, so that the individual really does have that expertise when they take the exam, and then they're ready to become fully certified. And so what's really exciting for IGCCB is this fantastic partnership with Siegel's Flock. They are the Asia Pacific partner for us. Their sole purpose with this partnership is to really pioneer what are the needs in the Asia Pacific region and how to meet the needs with the training, getting people certified, making sure that they have the stakeholders involved, how they can advocate with their local representatives, and any of the other stakeholders that we need. And so really, I want to kind of make up some time because I know I don't want to go over too much. What is the future? What can we do? I really encourage everyone to learn more about gambling disorders and different treatment options. If you're already trained in substance use disorder, it's a very simple crosswalk to expand your knowledge and your skills. Help to advocate. Many areas still lack funding in order to provide the services. And so they're not at pace with the expansion of how many people are being exposed to gambling harms with the need for services. Find out ways to support organizations for prevention and treatment, and really help with this growing need of professionals with specialized training. I can't iterate enough. Just understanding and being an expert in SUD is not enough to really be able to work with gambling disorders. And so we really need to keep moving forward with innovative approaches to treatment, prevention, and oftentimes that involves collaboration with stakeholders, and stakeholders can be with research as well. As we started off with Dr. Angela and all the information she was able to share, you can really see how this all comes together. And so with that, I want to thank everyone. I appreciate the time and the opportunity, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Jody. Very insightful discussion. I think the main the main item that Jody mentioned in her talk is that having the necessary training is good, but being certified is a lot better. We've seen in the previous presentations of Dr. Angela and Stephanie that problem gambling has really evolved. Therefore, we have to be very innovative in dealing with this particular problem. And for those who would like to be certified, to go through the certification process of the International Gambling Counselor Certification Board, Seagull's Flock Organization is the Asia Pacific partner. So we'll be more than willing to give you the necessary skills now to ensure that you would be able to get that certification. And I think, as mentioned earlier in the chat box, we will now be answering some of your questions. I am having now difficulty in tracking all of those questions because of the very insightful discussions that we had. So probably we can have Dr. Stephanie and Angela to join us now, and so that we could perhaps answer a few questions as early as now. And again, welcome to our 220 participants. So wow, we are now 220 at this point. Anyway, so perhaps we can already start answering a few questions. So let me just go through the chat box. Okay. I think yeah. Given that this one is from Cheryl, I think this was already answered. So yeah. So we'll now be going to the second question from Galu Yoga Ustara. His questions. Question number one: what are some key differences in gambling and gaming addiction patterns across different regions and cultures? Yeah, perhaps Dr. Angela and Dr. Stephanie can enlighten us about this particular question. So he wants to know the gaming addiction patterns. Dr. Angela?
Thank you. So I think, I mean, it's not something that we covered in the commission report itself. I think there are certainly growing cultures of gaming, and maybe this is actually a better question for you, Stephanie. Gambling, I know we did find that it is legal now in 80% of jurisdictions globally. So governments are increasingly legislating the gambling. However, I suppose there still are sections of the world, of course, where gaming is illegal. Typically, this aligns with Islamic culture, I think. So Indonesia, of course, gambling is still illegal, and Turkey, many of the Saudi Arabia. But I know that as unlicensed operators continue to target people in those countries, it becomes difficult, I think, to regulate. And I think that's why we need international cooperation frameworks and agreements to help governments where their populations are being targeted to really crack down on some of these companies that have licenses in other areas. And I think gaming, I might leave that to you, Stephanie.
Sure, absolutely. And I went through in the chat and answered a couple of questions for the sake of time since I went over. Uh,
Yeah.
so I think that there are more similarities than differences, really, when it comes to gaming addiction in different regions and cultures. There might be when patterns of play, I think one of the differences would be genres. There are certain genres or social norms and cultural norms that vary from culture to culture. For example, I do a lot of work in Singapore, and within Singapore, when it comes to professional video game playing or esports, the societal viewpoint is very different than what it is in the US or what it is in Latin America, or what it is in Europe, right? It's a bit more favorable Although in the US, when it comes to, let's say, competitive esports playing, there is a lot of support as well, where individuals can play these games similar to playing another sport and receive not just compensation for it as work, but also scholarships to universities. And and that kind of increases their engagement in the video game playing and can, again, kind of run along that line of, are we engaging in the leisure activity? Is it something that is now work related, or is it becoming harmful in some ways? When are we seeing those negative psychosocial consequences? So really, when it comes to, the patterns, genre is one of the main ones, so the style and type of gameplay, the way that society views video games is going to vary from culture and different regions, and also the amount of time and effort that is placed there. But when it comes to the mechanics of gambling that is found in video games, these are universally found within all games across all different regions. And since they're highly accessible online, and smartphones, regardless of their level now, right? You can have a smartphone that is 10 or 15 generations older than what the newest technology might be, that can still run any game. And developers are intentionally, creating games that are able to run on different platforms because they want to increase their audience and they want to increase the gameplay, and using a lot of these gambling mechanics to engage individuals. So those are things to be aware of.
Thank you, Dr. Stephanie and Dr. Angela. Two related questions from Galuyo Gaustara and Bulacan program. I think this is for Dr. Stephanie. What metrics are most reliable in assessing the effectiveness of educational campaigns or preventive programs, especially for the youth? And another related question, can you recommend reliable and valid tests to assess the severity of gambling or gaming disorder?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll address the first one when it comes to prevention work, right? So I think it's really going to vary. So there, of course, as we know, with prevention work, there's primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention programs in our efforts. So I think firstly, depending on what kind of measure you're going to use to assess for the gambling problem is going to be based on what type of prevention model you're utilizing with the populations. And so once you determine that, right, you can develop an assessment tool. I think community-based participatory models are always the best approach when it comes to prevention work, where we're first attaining some feedback from the communities we're going into, whether it's going into a school or a church or a neighborhood, and having these discussions with families and with children, and then getting their feedback on what's most important to them, and developing a prevention program from their input, right? Rather than just deriving it from evidence in the literature alone, especially when there's a lack of data to support the type of work that we're trying to do in the community. So really more of a grassroots effort, if you will. But yes, then having a pre and post test measure based on the feedback that you get from these pilot testing groups, and then developing that into the program would be the most effective. So that's for prevention. And when it comes to gaming, I think I provided already a list of a couple of tools here. So there's three in particular that are validated measures that I recommend. They have been taken from a systematic review that looks at all of the validated measures that exist for gaming disorder. And these were the three that that were determined to be of the highest validity, and also the ones that intersected the most with the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria, as well as the World Health Organization's ICD-11 criteria. It's been a long day for me, huh? So the ones that I mentioned in the chat, as you can see there, they're easily searchable. They're all open access.
Yeah.
The IGD SF9, the Lemons 9, and the IGD 10, all of those are ones that you can utilize.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Stephanie. This question is for Jody. With IGCCB certification credential, are we allowed to diagnose for gambling and gaming disorders? I think this question came from the Smart Recovery Indonesia.
Yeah, I think it's a really valid question. It does depend on the jurisdiction. Many places, will have funding attached to diagnosing, and oftentimes they will also attach not only the certification, but the education and or other credentials in order to diagnose. So a certification alone in many places will allow someone to diagnose, but often, as you know from our certifications, we actually require a certain level of education just to qualify for that certification. So I wish I had a very clear yes or no answer, but it's very complicated when it's attached to any type of funding and
Okay,
resources.
thank you, Jody. So I think this would be the last question. Considering that video games are increasingly monetized, what steps can be taken by both the gaming industry and the government to promote responsible gaming while minimizing the risk of gaming addiction among youth? Thank you, Cheryl Maborang, for that question. So Jody, Angela, and Dr. Stephanie, any one of you can answer that question.
Sure. I think Dr. Angela provided some good resources as well from her presentation. But essentially what it comes down to is educating the consumer about these monetization techniques and how they may be developing more risky or harmful behaviors as a result of it, and then finding ways to work with the gaming industry to provide safeguards, especially when it comes to children and their involvement with gambling mechanics within video games.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Stephanie, Dr. Angela, and Jody, for answering the questions of our participants. It's already 10:30 a.m. in the Philippines. In Indonesia, it's 9:27 in the morning. I think I got a go signal from Gideon to have our photo opportunity for all the attendees. We now have 225 attendees. So I guess Gideon will now be allowing everyone to open their camera. So may we request all attendees to please open your camera, and we will be having our group photo at this point while you are still very excited and enthusiastic to raise a lot of questions. So probably we need to optimize this opportunity. So Gideon will be the one to take the photo. So
Yes.
Gideon, yeah. So I'll give the floor to you.
Okay. So I
Yeah.
already opened the video. Please, everyone can start the video.
Wow.
There's a 9 part of the
Wow.
screen that I have to
Full house.
do the screenshot. Okay. So the first,
Okay. So you
okay,
have to smile. You have to smile, I guess, for the
okay,
next 5 minutes until
oh,
Gideon is done in screenshotting all I think the 9 frames that he mentioned earlier.
yes.
Okay.
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 So first frame, 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Next.
Keep
Take,
smiling, guys.
keep smiling. 1, 2, and 3. Next, the third frame, 1, 2, and 3. Okay. So the fourth,
Okay. So you just have to keep on smiling.
okay, 1, 2, and 3. The fifth, 1, 2, and 3. The sixth, 1, 2, and 3. 7, 1, 2, and 3. 8, 1, 2, and 3. 9, 1, 2, and 3. And the last one, 1, 2, and 3. Okay.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you
you,
very
Gideon. Thank you
much.
guys for being so cooperative. I guess whenever we are requesting people to smile, nobody gets tired. And I think that's a good indicator that everyone is still with us. You are still listening to the discussions. So at the moment, we have already finished 3 topics. And now we will be moving on to our fourth topic. The fourth topic shall talk about gambling disorder in Indonesia, mapping challenges and strategies for effective intervention. And this will be handled by Dr. Christiana Siste. Dr. Siste is a leading Indonesian psychiatrist with specialization in addiction psychiatry. So she completed her medical and psychiatry training at the Faculty of Medicine of the University of Indonesia. Since 2019, she has been a lecturer in the Department of Psychiatry at the Universitas Indonesia, teaching medical students and residents. Dr. Siste is also the head of the psychiatric department and head of the addiction psychiatry division at Dr. Sipto Mangun Consumo General Hospital, where she oversees a one-stop service center for patients with alcohol and behavioral addiction and HIV/AIDS. Her research interests lie in substance and behavioral addiction, emphasizing prevention, neurocognitive function, treatment adherence, genetics, and neuroimaging. She has spearheaded several significant studies, including cannabis use in prison, drug prevention programs for adolescents, and interventions for women with methamphetamine addiction in correctional facilities. Dr. Siste is particularly invested in exploring technology-assisted therapy and behavioral addiction. In addition to her university and hospital roles, Dr. Siste has developed an addict ion module for undergraduate and resiliency programs and actively participates in addiction policy making program in Indonesia. She is currently working to expand the postgraduate program for addiction psychiatry and HIV/AIDS to address the shortage of addiction psychiatrists in Indonesia. Internationally, Dr. Siste serves as an advisor to the Indonesian Association of Psychiatrists, UNODC, and the ISOP Global Scientific Advisory Committee, enhancing global collaboration in addiction treatment and research. Dr. Siste, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Gerard. So good morning, everyone from Jakarta. So I would like to share my presentation. Thank you for this opportunity. So I'm from ISAP Indonesia. I would like to present about stratifying risk and harnessing a technology-based approach to address the national gambling crisis in our country, Indonesia. And in Indonesia, the government has legally banned any gambling practices. And since pandemic era, online gambling activities are increasing. There are four times rapid growth of online gambling advertisement in our country compared to 2018. And the advertisement can be accessed by underage individual, for example, via social media or online gaming. One factor contributes to increase the activity of online gambling is online loan services, legal and illegal, which can be accessed very easy by everyone in our country. They do not need the real ID card to access the online loan, but just using the copy of ID card. So one person can borrow money from more than 10 accounts of online loans in one time. And in one last year, there are many reports about problems are caused by gambling disorder in Indonesia. So you can see here in the slide, as mentioned in this slide, a mother wants to sell kidney to pay her son debt because of online gambling. We could see also the gambler population are also varied from low economic status group up to high economic status. So in this article was mentioned a boss who owned big expedition also committed a suicide due to gambling debt. So as I mentioned before, gambling is illegal in our country. And in 1974, government issued a law regarding gambling since 1974. Then continue to develop about prohibition of online gambling law in 2016. And in 2023, the government stated that about anyone takes part in gambling activities is punished by law, including the organizer, operators, and also the player. But sadly, in our country, the organizer and operator mostly from foreign countries, so they cannot be punished by Indonesian law. So with the increasing problem is caused by gambling, we try to figure out the magnitude of the issue of gambling in our country. We have done the national survey in early 2022 during COVID pandemic with around 6,000 participants all around Indonesian region. We found the prevalence of problematic gambling is around 2%. It is slightly higher compared with the prevalence of drug use in our country. And most of them use a smartphone to play gambling. It means most of them are online gambler. Mostly they play slot machine and poker, but only 19% who perceive they have problematic gambling. And then we want to figure out the gambling problem after pandemic era. And we have done national survey in early 2024. So this year, we found the prevalence of problematic gambling is around 8.3%. So it is higher than in 2022. Most of them are male, 3 times compared to female. And most of the participants are online gambler. Mostly of them play gambling less than 1 year, and 40% of them have relatives or friends who also play gambling. A majority of them came from high level of education. As I mentioned before, it is easy to borrow money from online loan services in our country. And from this research, we found 23% obtaining legal and illegal online loan. When we discuss what the purpose to do gambling, so majority of them mention for entertainment. But some of them also mention gambling as a stress coping mechanism. The participants still continue to do gamble because they felt so confident to win, and also they wanted to chase the losses. And how about the treatment access for people with gambling disorder in Indonesia? We found data 41% of them perceive that they have problematic gambling behaviors, but only 23% of them perceive that they need to seek professional help, but only 4% of them who access mental health services. How about suicide and harm related to gambling in our country? 9% of them had suicidal thought related to gambling, and the most negative impact related to gambling are financial problem and also relationship problem. The gambling advertisement is still a problem in our country because there is no specific regulation governing advertisement about gambling. Almost 90% participants have ever seen gambling advertisement, and majority of them watch the advertisement in social media and also online gambling platform. It means underage population like child and teenagers can see the advertisement very easily. And there is correlation or association between watching gambling advertisement and severity of gambling. So we can see on this slide, watching gambling advertisement at least once a day will increase risk of gambling. Why? Because with watching gambling advertisement, it will offer degree of control that gamblers have over gambling platforms. And then with watching gambling advertisement, so the gambling stimuli offer imaginary of big wins. And then the gambling advertisement offer unclear and inexplicit or promotional on social media. So it means that the people who watch the gambling advertisement will think that the gambling is normal. And we move to the treatment of gambling disorder. We try various modality for the treatment for the people with gambling disorder in our country. So currently, cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT is the leading evidence-based treatment for gambling disorder. However, recent systematic review and meta-analysis assessing CBT for gambling disorder demonstrated that while CBT significantly reduced gambling severity, frequency, and intensity, but immediately post-treatment, this effect diminishes over time. So the patient with gambling disorder can have a relapse after a CBT program. So repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation or RTMS, which have demonstrated very effective for people with alcohol dependency because RTMS can promote neuronal plasticity and enhancing neuronal circuit recovery may offer synergetic effect with combined with CBT. So it can propose as effective modality for people with gambling disorder. So we try to have a clinical trial utilizing repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation or RTMS in the management of gambling disorder in Indonesia. So this is protocol for a pilot and feasibility study. So we have RCT clinical trial. We have two groups. So one group is, so the participants are people with gambling disorder. They don't have drugs addiction. So we divided them into two groups. One group is intervention group and the other group is a control group. So for the intervention group, there are 17 participants, and in control group there are 16 participants. So in intervention group, we gave them CBT and RTMS 15 times, 3 times a week. And in a control group, we gave them CBT and sham. Sham means that we also give them like RTMS but placebo, so not real RTMS. And we have a 12 session CBT. So this is the session of CBT module content. The first content is what does gambling means to you until 11 session about emotional regulation. And then we close the summary in 12 session. And then this is the temporary data result. We analyze 19 participants divided into two group, intervention and also control group. So this is the modality treatment. So this is the real coil. This is for RTMS through the electromagnetic wave, and then this is a sham coil. So this is a placebo. So the participant feel that there is real RTMS, but it's just placebo. So there is no electromagnetic wave for the participant within a control group. So this is for the example for the participant who is doing the RTMS in the clinical trial. And we done the analysis, the data with generalized linear mix model. And this is the temporary data result, but we have very interesting data results. So we try to assess the gambling severity with gambling symptom assessment scale or GSAS. So we compare the intervention group with the control group, and there are significant improvement on both group from baseline to 15 sessions. So because this is the temporary data result, and this interim analysis might seem that there is a more significant decrease in the intervention group, but however, there are no statistical significant differences between the two groups. But we need longer period of follow-up, and full sample analysis are needed to follow up treatment effectiveness. But we see there is a 10 to more significant decrease in the intervention group for gambling severity. And then what about the craving? So we also measure the craving between the intervention group and the control group. We use gambling urge scale, and we can see here the red line is intervention group and the blue line is the control group. And there are significant improvement on both group from baseline to 15 session. But the CBT and RTMS group, it means the intervention group, showing significant improvement on craving compared to control group. So it means that the participant in intervention group has higher reducing in craving compared with the participant in control group. And then we also assess the cognitive error. And there is the significant finding in gambling-related cognitive scale in gambling expectancies. So gambling expectancies means the participants perceive likelihood of winning and then feel enjoyment of gambling. And then he feels that gambling can solve the financial problem. So we can see here the red line is intervention group and the blue line is the control group. And from the data, from the analysis from the cognitive error, so we can see the significant finding in gambling expectancy. There are significant improvement on both group from baseline to 15 session. But the CBT and RTMS group, it means the intervention group, showing significant improvement on cognitive error in gambling expectancies compared to control group. So it means that the patient in intervention group with RTMS 15 times for 5 weeks, 3 times a week, and then with CBT modality has higher reducing in craving, and then improvement in cognitive errors, and also reducing in gambling severity. And what about the side effects? So they can feel headache, but it's not a very important finding because they can use like medicine to reduce the headache, but it will diminish after 6 sessions. After that, they don't feel headache anymore. So that is what we have done for the treatment modality in our country for people with gambling disorder. And this is for the take-home messages. Gambling is public health issue that has caused significant negative impacts, especially with development of digital technology. And we know that the harms caused include financial problems, domestic violence, and psychological, physical, and social issues, but these are often overlooked by the community. And the rapid growth of advertising from the gambling industry has triggered the perception that gambling is normal. So there is a need for international regulation that can be adapted by all countries, particularly those with limited resources like our country, Indonesia. So this is the acknowledgement for our research team in Indonesia and my mentors. Thank you very much, Gerald, for the time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Siste. I think the discussion of Dr. Siste put a lot of emphasis on the questions raised earlier. Number one was the question raised by Galu Yoga Ustara on the gaming addiction patterns. I think this was extensively covered by Dr. Siste. According to her research, 41% has problematic gambling problem in Indonesia. And global ads, at least exposing ourselves, so global advertisements at least once a week increases the risk of gambling. And the preferred modality at the moment in Indonesia is still the CBT. Another question that was posted earlier that was again extensively answered by Dr. Cristiano was the question from Bulacan program about the severity of gambling or gaming disorder tools, specific tools that can be used. And Dr. Siste extensively discussed the GSAS, or the Gambling Symptom Assessment Scale. I think this would be very helpful in assessing the severity of the problem as raised by Bulacan program. So Dr. Siste, thank you very much for sharing your research to us. Thank you very much.
Thank
Okay,
you, Gerald.
so yeah, thank you. So we will now be moving on to the second to the last presenter for today's for today's conference. Our next speaker is Mike Hooper. So Mike will be discussing Click and Play, the impact of digital media on gambling addiction. Mike is a certified substance abuse counselor and peer recovery specialist from the United States. And a U.S. Army veteran, Mike was introduced to smart recovery while battling his own mental health and substance abuse issues. Immediately seeing the value of an evidence-based program for a particular approach to self-reliant recovery, Mike soon became a meeting host for SMART, then served as a member of the U.S. SMART Recovery Outreach Department. His proudest achievement was co-founding the Veterans and First Responders online community for the United States. He has an extensive experience in utilizing smart recovery tools to combat common harmful behaviors on the modern world, issues such as internet, adult content, and gaming addiction. Mike has used the Smart Recovery 4-point program to guide participants suffering from online gambling addiction to pathways of balance and reduction of harmful lifestyle habits. Mike is currently the international meeting host support liaison and part of the training team for Smart Recovery global. So Mike, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Guy. I appreciate the introduction. And hello, everyone. And I'm very, very honored to be here among so many prestigious presenters. I hope I don't bore anyone with any of the information that I do because it was been covered so well by our panelists so far. But I am very excited to be here. This is obviously a subject matter that holds vital importance within the behavioral health and mental health communities, not just in the United States, but around the world. As the doctor mentioned earlier, uh, gambling's often overlooked or omitted because it becomes overshadowed with more common addiction practices with subjects such as opioid disorder or alcohol disorder. So I think this is a very, very important topic to talk about, especially with the increase of new demographics that are coming into contact with harmful harmful behaviors with gaming and addiction. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and show you guys the slides that we have prepared today. So as I mentioned, I will be talking about the impact of the digital age of gambling addiction, specifically dealing with how this affects specific demographics with media, and also how we utilize smart recovery to combat a lot of the issues that come along with gambling. So just some facts that I was able to gather through this. Quick story about my experience with gambling addiction when I first became a facilitator for smart recovery, and I started my meetings in New Jersey in the United States. One of the first participants to come to my meetings was someone suffering from gambling. This was back in 2018, and it was my first time um, interacting with somebody in a real life scenario that was dealing with a gambling disorder. And we learned a lot from each other through that practical exchange. And so when I was invited to do this, it brought back a lot of memories from those times. Since then, it's become a common issue that I see in multiple meetings that I host and I train other facilitators for. So it just has a personal emphasis for me when we talk about this subject. So one of the things I found interesting that recently gamblingindustrynews.com reported, they conducted a study in 2024 that there's an estimate that 4.2 billion people on this planet have gambled at least once last year. And that's literally nearly half the world's population, a little bit over that. And I found that extremely surprising that that number is so large. And out of that number, about 179 million are, as of August, were expected to have done that through digital platforms. So it just gives you an emphasis of how much of an impact this habit has on individuals, whether it's just through recreation or through harmful patterns of abuse, and what the digital age has done to increase those habits, right? So moving on with that, we're looking at the on how that rise has happened through the digital age. Because it's grown so much through especially through the superpowers that we have now. So like we expected in other gambling heavy nations like the UK, China, and European nations, it's not just focused on the UK, the United States. These facts have been growing ever since we've started taking in this data from the impacts that the digital age has been having um, on this program. So what we want to know is why, right? And what are the reasons why the digital media setting has been increasing the exposure to gambling? Well, a lot of that is probably what you've already begun to think about when looking at the factors of what digital gambling and digital media can do for this genre. Well, ease of access is one of them. As you've heard through a lot of these presentations, gambling is no longer just confined to a brick and mortar application, right? You don't just go to a casino anymore to gamble. You don't just go to a card game or a speakeasy. Now, anytime you turn on the TV, anytime that you open up your smartphone, anytime we can turn on a video game, there is some type of exposure that we could be subjected to for gambling, right? The ease of access has become severely problematic, especially since the fact that we um, do not regulate the conjunction of that participation in the way we would with exposure with, say, a substance like alcohol, right? Now, another problem that we've seen with the compulsiveness of gambling is the incentives that are given, especially for new participants, right? Here in the United States, DraftKings is one of the biggest promoters that we have on the digital media age. And they, as you can see on the screen there, um, there's a lot of incentives for joining that group. And by that, what they do is you put a little bit of money in and you get a large return. You would think that that might not be sustainable, but as they've known for many, many years now in Vegas and other areas like Atlantic City and New Jersey, it's the house will give away money because they know the return will come back to them eventually, right? The draw for the big win is something that will always give them that return back for their investment. So it makes it a lot easier to do in the digital age because it's constant exposure. So you see an ad anytime that you're not a member of an online streaming service such as YouTube, for instance, your programs are interrupted with commercials that are paid for by different promoters. And many of those commercials are for online betting and gambling, especially if you are watching a sport event. So the celebrity endorsements are another major factor that we see on online. The commercials that are done with celebrities like Kevin Hart here in the United States are extremely popular, using comedians and friendly perspectives towards gambling, making it look adventurous and fun, rather than something that was risque or adult behavior that we might have seen in the past when I was growing up, right? So this is something that has changed dramatically with the advertising industry, is that they are starting to cater gambling back towards a younger generation and a younger demographic. We also want to focus on how legalization has become a major, major issue here in the United States. It was not as common 30 years ago to find gambling in multiple states out other than from out west, where we were normally used to seeing it in Nevada and Arizona and Texas. Now, almost every state has some form of legalized gambling. Um, a interesting fact that I found out through CNN Business reported recently that the UAE, United Emirates, has appointed a committee to oversee the option for legalization of a national lottery in the gaming industry there, despite the fact that gambling had been forbidden by the Quran, which is and the UAE being predominantly Muslim, showing that even in nations where tradition and religion hold a very prominent factor in culture, gambling is still finding a way to make its presence felt. And obviously, this will open the door to different media sources and advertising sources for a brand new market that was not exposed to it before. And being that they will not be equipped for the normal pitfalls that maybe nations such as the United States or the UK, China, and other aspects of Asia that have been dealing with gambling for a long time, they're going to experience a lot more of the oversaturation that would be very dangerous to the population. So things of this nature being spread around, the world is something that we need to pay more attention to, because we saw factors like this in the United States many, many years ago with smoking, and how the industry began to cater more towards our youth and female demographics, which is what I want to talk about next, about how the media is changing that demographic targetization with these ads, right? 12.3% of America's youth, that's the ages of 12 to 25, fit the criteria for problematic gambling. Canada, United States, United Kingdom, and Australia reported an average of 60 to 80% of young people gamble at least once a year. I have a child in high school and one going into college. Both have online gaming on their phones that have some implementation of either benign or actual real currency gambling. And these are factors that we have talked about in our household frequently. As someone who works in the substance abuse field, I understand the dangers and implications of it, but it's shocking even to me how easy it is for somebody under the age of 18 to gain access to programming such as this. So another aspect that exposed a lot of young adults to online gambling was the COVID time when we were all experiencing that lockdown. Smartphones and social media and digital entertainment became a major factor in a lot of households because there wasn't much more to do. So again, that brought a new demographic into the form of gambling that we hadn't seen before on such a large scale. Then we want to talk about the impact that women are now having in gambling. Before, in the age of the the 50s and the 60s, it was a cool picture to have the American male with his cigarette and the martini while they're gambling at the table. Now that's beginning to change. Women are 3 times more likely to partake in online gambling, such as and like with scratch offs, bingo, and slots. A lot of that is due to the anonymity that can give women. Women are forced to deal with a lot of stigmas and stereotypes that men obviously in many cultures do not have to deal with. Women are forced to compete not only in the household for authority, but also in the professional field. So any type of form of weakness in a lot of cultures for women can be seen as a disadvantage. So even any sort of release from those stresses of everyday life is sought after. Gambling is one of those euphoric activities that can be done and in private now because of the ease of digital access that is becoming a lot more enticing to women around the world. So Yale University of Medicine put out a study that 45% increase since 2003 reported a rise in gambling use disorder specifically. That is astounding, and especially for those who deal in substance abuse counseling, such as myself. We're seeing a lot more people come in for mental health and behavioral health care, specifically associated with gambling. In the US, the gambling advertising regulated on a state level rather than a federal level. This gives states a lot more freedom to be very, very loose with what they allow for gambling. For instance, states that make a lot more money in revenue on an annual basis will have a lot more targeted gambling towards sensitive demographics, such as to young people, making it seem fun and flamboyant and cool, and things that we learned from our time with smoking and alcohol of how dangerous those advertisements can be. Those federal regulations that the United States put into place were because of the harmful behaviors that we're starting to adapt within those very sensitive demographics. We're seeing the same thing now with gambling advertisements, and it's very, very reminiscent to the 80s and 90s that we saw with alcohol and cigarettes. So it's something that obviously we're starting to pay a lot more attention to because the consequences to problematic gambling haven't changed, right? I don't need any statistics to tell anybody in this room or watching today what the harmful consequences to gambling can be. Many of my panelists have already mentioned some of the consequences that we have seen through this behavior. So obviously this is not something to be ignored, right? So what can smart recovery specifically do to help? So what we have seen with gambling disorder and the participants that have come into our meetings for that is that our approaches through the evidence-based program of smart recovery and the 4-point program that we utilize offer the same type of assistance that we would see with almost every other problematic behavioral health disorder, right? With smart recovery, we tend to focus on the why rather than the what. So instead of focusing primarily hard on the gambling aspect itself, we want to know why they are partaking this behavior to the point that it's harming their lives. What is causing the draw towards this problematic behavior. With smart recovery, we dive into those reasons to start picking apart the problem that began the abuse in the first place, right? We've seen that this program is effective, and because of its tactical approach to the why, right? And it's tangible evidence that someone can track through their changes of plans and their values that they begin to recognize with smart recovery again. And again, because we are primarily a digital platform, the ease of access for our program makes it very, very accessible to anyone around the world. So it's not a factor of finding a meeting in person as it used to be um, more prevalent years ago. Now meetings are accessible to everyone everywhere almost 24 hours a day. So this way, it gives us an advantage to combat this behavior on a level where the behavior is becoming problematic, right? So we're fighting the fight right where it's happening, right in the digital arena. One of the things that we help participants do is what does a lifestyle without problematic behavioral patterns look like to you? What is it that you are looking for or enjoy from the gambling? As the doctor mentioned with the gaming industry, one of the approaches that we do is try to find out where that euphoria is. Why do you enjoy it so much? What are you getting out of it, right? And we look at it from that aspect because what we want to do is create a healthy alternative to that pattern, looking to find out why the individual is getting it or what they may not be getting from their everyday lives, and trying to find a change of plan to work towards bringing in that aspect of joy that they feel they are getting from the harmful behavior into something that is much more sustainable in a healthy, balanced life. Dr. Joe Gerstein is one of our founding fathers, and three questions that he asks in the beginning of all of his SMART meetings is, what do you want for your future, right? What are you doing to currently get to that desired future? And most importantly, how do you feel about it? Because as anyone who's ever partaken in treatment or does treatment now knows that it's not enough to just get into treatment. It's not enough to just be in recovery. If I don't believe in what I'm doing, the chances of that remaining sustainable over time begin to drop, right? And so I want to make sure that when I'm engaging with someone in a meeting, I'm fulfilling their desires for change on their level, understanding what that recovery and change of plan looks for them, not being biased over what my beliefs of their recovery are. So I want to make sure that they feel that what they are doing to change their lives towards lifestyle balance is actually realized. And we approach it rationally, right? It's person-centered means taking their desires into treatment into account, just as I just mentioned, right? Whether that be harm reduction, abstinence, or looking for more preventative methods through education and awareness. I always start with what the participant or the organization wants. It's not about what I feel needs to be accomplished. What I want to know is, how do I help that individual find life balance, regardless of what that life looks like in any other aspect other than the individual who is coming to look for a support with our program. So taking in the person-centered approach for smart recovery is extremely important, because our program stands for self-management and recovery training, and self-management being extremely prominent in that aspect. We want the individual to have the empowerment to be able to walk away knowing that they can sustain themselves with the tools that they learn, right? Understanding and accepting the short, mid, and long-term goals as a process, right? This is not something that is a click and cure method. It is a process like anything else you would do in training, learning the steps, understanding them, practicing them, repeating them, repetition of positive reinforcement, and engagement in progressive and supportive social networks, right? Eliminating that need for instant gratification, right? Which we see so prominently in abuse and addiction disorders, right? So that's something that we want to cultivate, is accepting the process of training for better life skills. We also want to make sure that they walk away with crisis management skills. So when they are exposed to dangerous situations that may put them in a predicament to jeopardize their recovery, they can walk into those situations with confidence. They know I have options. I don't have to give in to my urges and cravings, right? I can dispute irrational thinking that would tell me that I am powerless to do something, that I have no control over the behaviors that I feel, right? With our cognitive behavioral therapeutic skills, we help individuals understand how they think influences how they feel and how they behave, and they have a choice in how to regulate those actions. We also understand that the family and loved ones are important. That's why Smart Recovery has a very intricate and extensive family and friends program using the community reinforcement and family training method developed by Dr. Robert Myers. So we implement our 4-point program into that approach of creating an understanding with the family. So there is a connection that is done through positive and progressive communication, transparent boundary settings, and family self-care. We want to make sure that the family members are not giving more than they have to sustain themselves. The oxygen mask theory, for instance. We want to make sure that everyone is engaged and understands their points of view and that everyone feels heard. So this way, we are not creating dissension, but creating connection. All right. And what is the secret? Well, honestly, it's the same program regardless of the disorder, right? And for those that invest in our program, they've understood that it is a low cost to be engaged with Smart Recovery because our meetings are free. But it is a very high return for the small amount that you may come out financially to have personnel trained. There are countless rewards in the personnel that the participants that will be attracted in the evidence-based services that you can provide. So we have yet to see individuals that suffer from a certain disorder that haven't found some benefit in the SMART 4-point program, which is something that we are very, very proud with. And we are doing our best to create that awareness that gambling addiction is a behavioral health disorder and it should be treated as such. It's not a social failing or a moral incapacitation. It's something that we are treating as a health crisis, and we treat it with the same manner of respect. So, leading ways that we can change today when you walk away from this webinar, change our language, right? Be conscious of how we are talking about gambling and gaming addiction, right? Don't leave our predicates of judgment at the door, right? Change our presumptions about the individuals that are suffering. Why, and destroy that stigma of the degeneracy that comes attached sometimes with that thought process of people that are suffering with disorder, right? Increase that level of healing by attracting individuals to come seek help and seek aid. So that's something that we want to make sure that individuals understand. So with that, I would like to thank everybody for paying attention and staying with me through this whole incident. If you like more information about Smart Recovery, you can find it there on our website, smartrecoveryglobal.org, and that is my email if anybody would like to contact me specifically. And with that,
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike, for extensively covering the topic that was assigned to you. So again, my key takeaways in this in the talk of Mike, number one is that Mike mentioned several factors that catalyzed gambling abuse and disorder in the United States. Number one is ease of access. Number two, incentives such as the free bets, and number three, celebrity endorsement, which is, I guess, the celebrity endorsement is not just happening in the United States, but also in the Philippines. Okay. And the second major key takeaway is that smart recovery is an effective approach that can be used to address gambling abuse and disorder. We've been getting a lot of questions about smart recovery, but I won't be asking those questions at this point. This will be reserved immediately after the presentation of our last discussion for today. So thank you very much, Mike, for that wonderful and very insightful discussion. Okay, so we are now here at the last presenter for today. The last presenter, but definitely not the last. He's still here with us. I think due to time zone issue, It's, I guess, around 3 or 4 in the morning in his current location. So our last speaker is Pedro Romero Franco. Pedro is a safer gambling expert with experience in senior safe gambling roles at top gambling companies and charities such as Bet Blocker and Gambling Therapy, supporting people affected by gambling harm worldwide. He is a trained psychologist and counselor who combines psychodynamic and CBT approaches that has over a decade and a half of clinical experience. His research at the Center of Excellence in Responsible Gambling at Gibraltar University on innovative treatments for gambling disorder with a focus on psychedelic assisted therapy. So to talk about Bet Blocker, the advantages of a free and anonymous gambling blocking software. So guys, please help me in welcoming Pedro Romero Franco. Pedro, the virtual floor is yours.
Oh, hello, and thank you, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today with all of you, and fantastic speakers. So yeah, I think one of my main sort of view. Sorry if I'm a bit loopy. Have a 4 a.m. So is that I have different point of view. A bit of a 360 degree on the whole problematic gambling issue. I have worked. I originally trained as a psychologist and a therapist. Then I end up working in the gambling industry. For big companies. Like your 888, Bally's, William Hill, etc. Then I went to the charity sector. I worked for 3 years as head of gambling therapy, which is part of the Gordon Moody Association. We were treating there like the severe, the end of the spectrum in terms of problematic gambling. Then I went back to the industry, a sort of burnout after a few years, uh, probably working with uh, operators that they were not as proactive and others that I work in the past. So, one of the things, that is important is that it's not that homogeneous. You have companies, that they try the best, and there's other companies, that they just do the minimum requirements that you get from the regulator. In the last few years, have been working for the Blocker, which is a fantastic charity. And also my middle life crisis is doing a PhD about the potential of psychedelic assisted therapy, psychedelics combined with psychological support for people affected by problematic gambling. So in late May this year, we will be having a retreat in the Netherlands, and we will have hopefully a cohort of veterans with problematic gambling that they will undergo a psychedelic retreat combined with psychological support. But today we're here to talk about BetBlocker. BetBlocker is a free blocking software. It's an app, but it can also be installed in your computer that can be used anonymously and allow people to ban themselves from regulated and unregulated operators. At the moment, we block around 85,000 gambling websites and about 1,500 apps. It's something that is widely used. Say we operate as a charity. There's similar products out there, but many of them they are commercial operations. The objective, is to make money, and our objective is just to help people with that they are suffering from negative effects from problematic gambling. Why for us was important to have this charity model, mainly because what you normally find when you have a person with problematic gambling is that a you know they don't have any money. Normally they arrive to us at point of crisis. So what happened that okay, you cannot a person that have the bank account to zeros or minus, they have max you know the credit. You cannot ask them for a pricey subscription. Why? Because they don't have the money, and probably if they had the money they would be chasing losses. They will have an extra spin. uh, and what normally happen is that the people that they needed the most, they don't have access to it. The other thing that is it's an advantage of our charitable model is because we don't require uh, any sort of payments. It's easier for someone to engage with our software. Why? Because you don't need to fill your card details, you don't need to find your card, you don't need to go through the whole rigmarole of making a payment. So you just can click and download. The other advantage is that this anonymous. Okay, why being anonymous is a great advantage. As we all know, a lot of people that is suffering from gambling related harm is the stigma. So uh, you know differently than with many substance use disorders, because gambling is a behavioral disorder. Sometimes people attribute that it's a character flaw. Okay, why don't you stop gambling? Well, if a person I don't know, it's addicted to opioids. Say, look, you don't have cravings, you don't have bodily reaction. My body needs this. So sometimes, there's a exacerbated stigma with gambling. Okay, why don't you stop gambling? So it is really important that, okay, we don't ask for any information. Again, you don't need to put your name, you don't need to put your email, you don't need to give us your address. So your details are secure with us. Why? Because we don't have them. Also, it makes the activation easily. What happened? There's other type of software that you need to make a payment, or you need to ask a charity for an activation code. They receive the email, next day they send you the activation code. What happened? By the time that you get the activation code, in many occasions, gamblers, they talk themselves out from taking this step towards recovery. What happened? You get the next day the activation code, and then you're like, well, maybe it's not that bad, or I can, talk with someone to bail me out. So it is important that once the person have taken the decision, that we allow them to act quickly into this decision, not to delay the ask for help. And also a big advantage, of having free and anonymous blocking software is the security. We see day after day that big corporations get hacked. You get hackers that they uh, hack banks, social security numbers, addresses, and in big tech, LinkedIn, HSBC, even the Ministry of Defense in the UK a few months ago, they got information through a third party. So gamblers, sometimes they are very apprehensive about putting their details into a list, because what happened if this list is hacked and put in the dark web? Okay, you don't want for your employer to know that you have a problem gambling issue. You don't want for your family to know. Why? Because there's a lot of stigma and shame associated. So we're just safer, not because our security is higher, it's just because we don't have your data. One of the things about BetBlocker is that we take a bit of an agnostic approach. We're not pro gambling, or we're not anti gambling. We're sort of neutral. We say, look, gambling is like many other activities. The poison somehow is in the dose. So if you overdo the activity, can be negative. If you place a bet, from time to time, it doesn't need to have harmful consequences. So apart from the outright ban, so you can ban yourself from, I don't know, 1 day to 5 years, and you cannot modify it once it's installed. We also have another tool that is preventative, that is the calendaring feature. So people can use this feature instead of the block to decide when do they want to be blocked, like some specific days. So imagine that we have a person that said, look, I may have one drink too many during the weekends, and I may go, once I'm drunk in the gambling app, and spend too much money. Okay, you know what? I'm going out tonight. I'm going to block myself, tonight. Or it's Christmas. Okay, I'm going to block myself during this festive period. So make sure that during this time, I won't be gambling. Or I want to block myself in the next 5 days after payday. So I make sure that I pay my bills. So we're also developing a new feature that hopefully we will be launching in January. That is also a timer feature. So people will be able to decide, the time brackets where they want to gamble and when they want to be banned. So imagine that, okay, your kids go to sleep at 9 p.m. and you want to gamble for 1 hour or 2 hours. Okay, so you put the timer, so from 9 till 11, and after that you block cross operator. There have been operators that they have developed this type of tools, but what happened? You're playing with operator A, you get the block, and then you go to operator B. So, it doesn't work if it's not a cross industry tool, that also covers the black market. So that's something that we have in the pipeline. Another important thing about our software is that we have it localized in many languages. So Dutch, English, German, Norwegian, Romanian, Spanish. We're launching next week in Ukrainian, Russian, and Polish. This is a project that have been sponsored by Gamble Aware, in the UK, which is the main charity there, and is to help minorities and refugees in the UK. At the moment with the war in Ukraine, we have a lot of refugees, in the UK, and they are a population that they are particularly vulnerable. Why? Because they may be traumatized, they may be in a situation where they need money, they may not have gambling literacy, and they may think that this may be an easy way to make money, and it's not. Gambling, anyone that have gambling literacy knows that the house in the longer term always is going to win. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a business. We are available for any type of device: Android, iOS, Windows, Mac, Linux, Fire OS. And as I said before, we block also the black market, which is particularly a main issue in jurisdictions where gambling is not regulated, or you don't have like a national self-exclusion sort of program or database, even in places where you have a national self-exclusion database. To bypass this is extremely easy nowadays with a VPN, or just look online for operators that they're not in the database. We are open to collaboration with anyone that wants to reach to us. So we're free, we don't require any type of contract. If any of you wants to use us as a resource, just need to drop me an email. Pedro, we want to have you as a link. Here you go. You have the logo, and you can refer people to us. Also, if anyone in Indonesia wants to collaborate with us, we will be absolutely delighted to localize, to translate the software to Indonesian. As it's called, is Bahasa, the language. Yeah. So we're also always open for any type of collaboration. So that's it from me, and just thanking you all for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Pedro. I think the key message here is that times have indeed changed, and digital age has not just made our lives a lot easier, but it also somehow expedited the rapid proliferation of gaming and gambling related problems. And based on the message of Pedro, Bet Blocker is a service that can be tapped to control and even to mitigate the issue and its consequences. So thank you very much, Pedro, for sharing your program to us. So at this point, may I have Dr. Sisten and Mike to please join us here. Please open your camera so that we can answer a few questions that I got and were raised. Number one question, I think this is for Dr. Siste. From Pangki, what are the unique cultural and social factors in Indonesia that contribute to gambling problems? And how do traditional beliefs and societal norms and affect the likelihood of seeking help?
Yeah, thank you, Gerard. So thank you, Mr. Punki, for the question. So before, yeah, we have the culture of gambling. So gambling is part of our culture, but the main purpose of gambling in our culture is not for looking for the money, but for the community, sociality. I mean, to play with friends, to have friends from gambling community. So that's the main purpose. But now the main purpose for gambling is shifting. So to look for the instant money. So that's the main purpose from online gambling. And the unique aspect from our online gambling in our country is the involvement of the family for the people with gambling disorder. I mean that when one member in the family have gambling disorder, so the whole family try to involve to pay the of the family member. So they took the debt of the family member, and they think that it will make the condition better, and it will make the condition better, and then make the people with the gambling disorder will recover soon. But the perspective is wrong, because it will stimulate the people with gambling disorder to do gamble again. So that's the unique culture, because when I discuss with colleagues from Australia, for example, so the people with gambling disorder, they have their own responsibility. So it's different with our country. So it's very important to educate the family about this, and that's why it's influenced the seeking treatment in our country. So because the family involvement is very big in our country, so it prevent to seek the treatment in our country. So they will come to the health treatment center with the very severe condition. So it's very important for us to educate the community, important to bring to the health center as soon as possible, as early detection is very
So
important.
this
Thank
goes
you,
back
Gerald.
to the questions, no, question answered by Dr. Stephanie earlier. Her key message, her answers. Number one is to have meaningful conversation, and number two is to manage our relationship. So thank you, Dr. Christiana, for answering that question. Next question is for Mike. Question for Mike. So smart recovery meetings can also work for people with gambling and gaming problem. Mike.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned that towards the end of my presentation, one of the advantages of smart recovery is that we it's not necessary to adapt the program around the specific disorder. We can help mold an individual approach using the exact same tools. For instance, with gambling and gaming disorders, after we approach the topic of what a person is looking for, the next thing we want to do is establish the values that that person has in their life, right? Understanding what that individual's hierarchy of values are, and then through understanding tools like cost benefit analysis and working through pros and cons of the habits that they do that are jeopardizing those values, they begin to realize the irrationality behind the thinking of what they are doing when they're gambling, right? Or when they are gaming too long, right? And by understanding what they get out of that activity and then establishing a more healthy and more sustainable action that grants that same reward pattern, but in a much more balanced atmosphere where it is taking those values into accord, then we can begin to create a new pattern of routine. As I mentioned before, with dealing with coping with urges and cravings, we also teach crisis management tools. So when I'm having an urge, when I'm having a craving, understanding how to dispute those irrational emotions and those irrational thinking patterns, right? Understanding by questioning those thought patterns. Why do I feel like I have to keep going totalitarian statements when I'm speaking about my gambling or gaming habit? Do I have to get to the next level right now? And by creating that doubt, by creating those comparable moments, an individual begins to realize that they do have options, right? They are not just simply slaved to this one track of committing to this compulsory disorder. So the Smart Recovery Program has been extremely effective for those suffering with gambling and gaming disorders. So it's a
Yeah.
long-winded answer for that
Yeah,
is yes.
yeah. So
So
thank you,
yes, it
Mike.
is
Two
actually
follow-up
very effective.
questions. Number one, does the usage of smart recovery require prior training or certification? And then another question, somehow related to that is, what is the difference between smart recovery and Gamblers Anonymous?
So, okay, so for the first question, yes, it does require training. Our meeting hosts or facilitators, as they're called in the United States, are trained to utilize the program. They learn our skill sets as long as the philosophy and the basis of the 4-point program, along with the basics in therapeutic practices such as cognitive behavioral therapy, rational emotive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and most importantly, the use of motivational interviewing. Because smart recovery is not a fact, we do not have a structured sequential pattern that you might see with like a 12-step program. You mentioned the difference between Gamblers Anonymous. So we use our 4-point program more as a guide through an individual stages of change that they accomplish through their lifestyle by attaining, through the process of attaining lifestyle balance. So our facilitators are trained in the program to help individuals realize their own measure of success by utilizing motivational interviewing and tactics such as positive affirmations and summary statements and bringing about open-ended questions, being aware of the type of language that we are using so we're not using absolute statements, putting ourselves in a box form of reaching an absolute point. Creating options is what smart recovery is about, and there is a training that we do conduct to do that. So that is the pretty much answer for both questions. The major difference with us is that we are an evidence secular based program, so we don't adhere to any one type of model. We don't take any type of specific standpoint. The basis of smart recovery is that we emphasize whatever works for the individual. So whether that be somebody that is looking for more of a social connection, or somebody that's looking for more individual tangible tools, or a better connection spiritually, we incorporate what's important to the individual. So that individual doesn't have to change for the program. The program adapts for the person.
Okay, thank you, Mike. For Pedro, number one question is there any documented research on the effectivity of bet blocker? And another question, which is somehow related to that, what are the technical limitations of gambling blocking apps such as bet blocker? For instance, how do these apps manage to keep up with the new gambling websites, somehow related to the effectivity question earlier, that are constantly emerging, and what challenges do they face in blocking content effectively across all devices? Pedro, please.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question, because it is a very, very important question.
Yeah.
We have three ways, to crawl the internet, because this um, websites, particularly when they're blocked by, a country or whatever, it's very easy for them to change the URL and mushroom back somehow. So at BetBlocker, we have three approaches. The first one is we have a software that crawl regulators' websites, even sort of gray regulators like Curacao or other more obscure jurisdictions. We find what are the licensees, the website, and automatically block it. We also have a partnership with artificial intelligence company. So they have used to train the system that we use, all the 85,000 websites that we have blocking. So this artificial intelligence, is just scanning the whole internet, and any page that is identified as gambling with gambling product, then is added to our database. The third tool, that we have, and this is also really great because, it engage people that use the app, is the suggest a website feature. So basically, if any of the people that they are using our app uh, finds a website that is not blocked, it can send it to us, we get review, and then we will block it. So for example, particularly in new markets, so we got a partnership with a charity in Nigeria. So the first thing that we say, okay, we have thousands of websites, do you have a list in Nigeria of websites that they are common against people that you're treating? Oh yeah, we have, this list of 200 websites. Okay, maybe there were four that we didn't have. Or we got a partnership with a charity in Romania, they tend to do the same. So this sort of things is also very useful. In terms of the effectivity of the app,
Yeah.
one of the things is that we're a charity. We don't have funding. Like some private organization, maybe to engage with private research consultancy that is going to charge you tens of thousands of pounds. To do a report on your the effectiveness of your app. But we are trying to work with a couple of research, universities, because I think, always when you engage with university, it's a bit less biased or potentially biased than when you work with a sort of research consultancy company. So we're in the process of it, and if there's anyone, any university that wants to help us, we're welcome. But at the moment, we're in talks with a couple of them, and hopefully if we can, to have a peer review paper on any of the aspects of the effectiveness, which we think is a bit of a higher standard.
Okay, thank you, Pedro. I think this question from Pamela is for Dr. Siste. Aside from psychotherapy, is there any medication for gambling addiction? Is psychotherapy more effective to address this problem?
Yeah, so the best combination is using psychotherapy. CBT is the best modality, and combined with medication, for example, mood stabilizer or high dose antidepressant like SSRI, and then combined with RTMS, transmagnetic stimulation with electromagnetic wave, using electromagnetic wave through dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So three combination is the best combination for people with gambling disorder to reduce the craving, to improve the cognitive errors, and to reduce the severity of the gambling symptom.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Siste. I think this would be the last question because we have already gone beyond the 10:30 cutoff for our conference. So this is for everyone. With the digital age making gambling more accessible through online platforms and mobile apps, how can we address the unique psychological impact and addictive potential of digital gambling, especially among vulnerable populations? Dr. Siste, please.
So we cannot inhibit the technological advance, but we can improve how the parenting style. We can improve how teenager develop to be mature and a better young adult. I mean, to be addict for gambling or gaming online. So it needs many factors, for example, biological, psychological, and social. And then, for example, as Dr. Stephanie mentioned, parenting style is very important. And then from my presentation, we know that the people the one purpose to gambling as coping mechanism. So we can teach how to cope the problem. So it's very important for them to achieve something real, except from gaming and gambling. So it's very important to teach them better than doing gaming and gambling. And then it's also need the involvement of government, like in our country, in Indonesia. It needs work from government to inhibit or reduce the advertisement pop up in online or social media. So it needs universal work from government side, and then clinical sites and community sites. I think it needs a general work to inhibit the advertisement in online platform.
Thank you very much, Dr. Siste. Thank you very much, Pedro, and thank you very much, Mike. I guess, again, in the interest of time, we have to cut our question and answer portion, but thank you for sharing your insights regarding the topic. Okay, so I guess we have already covered the topics that we intend to cover for today. And I guess Smart Recovery, IGCCB, Sigal's Plaque, and ISOP Indonesia should consider having a second round of this very insightful discussion. Okay, so to formally close our conference for today, I would like to call on the director of ISOP Indonesia, Dr. Dia Utami. So Dr. Utami, the virtual floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Gerald. Yes, good morning from Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, I withdraw this enlightening webinar to close. I want to extend my deepest gratitude to all of our speakers and participants. Today's discussion has provided us with critical insight into the risks associated with gambling and gaming in our digital age. Thank you for our distinguished speakers, Jody Bethholt, Dr. Stephanie Diaz-Morel, Dr. Christiana Siste, Mike Hooper, Pedro Romero Franco, and Dr. Angela Rintul. Your expertise and contribution have been invaluable in deepening our understanding and sharing and shaping our approach to these challenges. We have explored the global landscape of gambling, the vital role of certification in ensuring effective counseling practices, the importance of academic contribution, clinical insight into the psychiatric implication of gambling and gaming, practical approach to counseling, innovative solution for promoting safer gambling, and the critical need to evidence-based intervention and regulation. I also want to express my heartfelt appreciation to our partners, Seagull Frogs, IGCCB, and Smart Recovery International. Your support and collaboration have been crucial in making this event possible and impactful. The collective efforts of our organization demonstrate a shared commitment to addressing the complexities and risks associated with gambling and gaming in our communities. To our attendants, thank you for your active participation and engagement. Your question and interaction have enriched our discussion and demonstrate the global commitment to addressing these pressing issues. Your involvement is crucial in our collective effort to mitigate the risks associated with gambling and gaming. As we look ahead, I'm excited to announce that ISAP Indonesia will be hosting the ISAP Regional Conference in Bali in September 2025. This conference will be bring together professionals from around the globe to share knowledge and best practices in substance use prevention and treatment. More detail will be available in the near future. So please stay tuned for updates. Follow us the Instagram and keep an eye to our website isapnet. As we move forward, let us continue to collaborate, share knowledge, and implement strategies to protect and support individuals in our community by working together. We can make a significant impact in reducing the harms associated with gambling and gaming and fostering a safer digital environment for all. Thank you very much for all and see you in the next webinar and also see you in Bali next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Otami, and see you in Bali. So before we let everyone go, we would like to have a few announcements. So I think Gideon will be sharing the slides. Number one is the all participants will be receiving their e-certificates upon accomplishment of the evaluation link that was already shared in the chat box. So that's number one. Number two, as announced by Dr. Otami, so we will be having our ISAP Indonesia will be having their regional conference in Bali. So it will be held from September 15 up to 19, 2025. The theme is Pioneering Addiction Science for Global Impact, Innovate, Integrate, and Sustain. And announcement number 3, this is about the second. Yeah, what's the next slide? Okay, so this is for our organization, Seagulls Flock. So we are calling for papers. We would like to announce that we will be having the second international conference for responsible gambling and gaming addiction. This will be held next year from May 19 up to the 21st, no, in Novotel, Manila. So we would like to request for proposal. So if you have anything to share related to the topics that we will be covering, these things will be much appreciated. The proposal should be submitted on or before January 15, 2025. So the email address is info@seagullsflock.org. Again, that's it. Thank you very much for being so cooperative. And as they say in Indonesia, terima kasih. Maraming salamat and thank you for participating in this conference. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.